On July 1, 1944, a significant event unfolded at Hollandia Air Base in New Guinea. 4 P-38 Lightnings, having completed an arduous 6.5-hour sortie deep within enemy territory, made their final approach and landed. From 3 of these formidable twin-engine fighters, the military pilots emerged, their countenances weary, their fuel gauges registering critically low levels, perhaps a mere 50 gallons remaining in their tanks. Yet, the 4th aircraft, piloted by a 42-year-old civilian, presented a stark contrast, still holding a substantial 210 gallons, despite undertaking the identical mission, encountering the same meteorological conditions, and flying the exact same model of sophisticated aircraft. This particular aviator had somehow managed to conserve an astonishing 200 gallons more fuel than even the most skilled and seasoned fighter pilots operating in the vast Pacific theater. The ground crew chief, a man accustomed to the precise measurements of wartime aviation, gazed intently at his fuel stick, then, compelled by disbelief, re-examined it. For many months, American airmen had meticulously operated these powerful twin-engine fighters, adhering strictly to the operational dictates outlined in their flight manuals, maintaining a constant 2200 RPM and utilizing auto-rich mixture settings. Every procedure, every protocol had been rigorously instilled in them since their earliest days in flight school. They had been emphatically taught that any deviation from these established norms would inevitably lead to catastrophic engine failure. Specifically, that running an engine over square, characterized by high manifold pressure coupled with low RPM, was tantamount to aviation suicide. But now, standing on that sweltering New Guinea airstrip, confronted by fuel readings that fundamentally contradicted every deeply held tenet of engine management within the Army Air Forces, a profound and unsettling question permeated the humid Pacific air. Could it be that the very foundations of their flight training were, in fact, entirely erroneous? Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. A game of checkers, a brief respite from the relentless pressures of war, had been underway for approximately 20 minutes when a distinct rap echoed at the screen door. Colonel Charles MacDonald, his brow furrowed in concentration, barely lifted his gaze from the red and black squares, his tactical mind still deeply engrossed in calculating the optimal next moves. The oppressive afternoon heat bore down relentlessly on their improvised headquarters at Hollandia Air Base. Across from him sat Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith, equally absorbed in their simple yet engaging entertainment, one of the precious few diversions available in this remote corner of Netherlands, New Guinea. "Excuse me, gentlemen," a voice imbued with a quiet but unmistakable authority cut through the hum of the afternoon, finally prompting MacDonald to look toward the doorway. Standing there was a man of middle age, clad in crisp navy khakis, his uniform remarkably immaculate, despite the pervasive humidity. "I'm Charles Lindbergh." MacDonald's hand, poised mid-air above a checkerpiece, froze. The name, instantly recognizable, hung heavy in the air, resonant with the gravity of a significant historical event. Like the lingering smoke from a downed aircraft, Smith's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. But MacDonald found himself simply staring at this rather unassuming civilian, struggling to reconcile the monumental legend with the ordinary-looking man now standing before them. "That Charles Lindbergh," MacDonald finally managed, his voice tinged with disbelief. The one who achieved the solo flight to Paris 17 years ago. General Hutchinson sent me, Lindbergh calmly continued, stepping further into their cramped quarters. He believed I might be able to offer some insights into P-38 combat operations for you. MacDonald slowly rose to his feet, the checker game now utterly forgotten. At the relatively young age of 29, he commanded the prestigious 475th Fighter Group. Yet he had grown up devouring tales of Lindbergh's monumental Atlantic crossing. For virtually every aspiring pilot in America, the spirit of St. Louis represented far more than mere aviation history. It symbolized the pivotal moment when flying transitioned from dangerous aerial stunts to a viable and genuine mode of transportation. And now, that same legendary aviator stood in their humble tent, seeking to understand the harsh, daily realities of flying combat missions across the immense Pacific. "Of course, Mr. Lindbergh, please do sit down," MacDonald offered, gesturing toward a folding chair. He then promptly called for Colonel Lewis. It was imperative that Lewis be present for any discussion concerning P-38 operations, as the commanding officer of the 433rd Fighter Squadron possessed an unparalleled understanding of the dire and overwhelming logistical challenges, the crushing mathematics, of their current operational predicament. Colonel Lewis arrived within mere minutes, his flight suit still visibly damp with perspiration from the morning's intense briefing session. He took one look at their unexpected visitor, and his customary professional composure visibly fractured. "Mr. Lindbergh, what extraordinary circumstances bring you to our little corner of paradise?" The profound irony embedded in his question was not lost on any of them. Paradise. If paradise, indeed, consisted of scorching metal hangars baking under the relentless tropical sun, an endless expanse of mud that stubbornly refused to dry, and the incessant, irritating buzz of insects that seemed utterly impervious to every repellent the quartermaster could possibly supply. Yet Lewis's inquiry was undeniably sincere. What could the world's most celebrated aviator possibly desire concerning their fighter operations? "I'm here to learn," Lindbergh responded with characteristic simplicity, his voice calm and direct. "And perhaps to share some observations I've gathered about long-range flying." Lewis settled into another available folding chair, and MacDonald could discern the subtle shift in his demeanor, as if he were mentally transitioning into a formal briefing mode. "Well, Mr. Lindbergh," Lewis began, his tone now more businesslike, "our situation is quite straightforward. We are currently flying missions that push the very limits of these aircraft's capabilities." The colonel proceeded to unroll a well-worn map, carefully spreading its creased surface across MacDonald's desk and nudging the checkerboard to one side. His finger meticulously traced routes spanning hundreds of miles of the vast, azure Pacific Ocean, dotted with minuscule islands that, while appearing insignificant on paper, represented crucial life-or-death navigation points for pilots venturing alone over the seemingly endless expanse of water. 6.5 to 7 hours, Lewis continued, his voice adopting the measured, almost weary cadence of someone who had calculated these critical figures countless times. That is what we are demanding of these young men now. Missions that were considered utterly impossible a mere year ago are steadily becoming routine, and the fuel margins— He shook his head, a gesture conveying the gravity of the situation. MacDonald observed Lindbergh studying the map with the intense focus of an engineer scrutinizing intricate blueprints. Those pale blue eyes moved systematically from one island to the next, calculating distances with the precise, practiced discernment of someone who had dedicated decades to contemplating the intricate relationship between range and endurance. It was unequivocally the gaze of an aviator who profoundly understood that fuel was not merely a numerical value on a gauge. It represented time, it represented distance, and ultimately it represented the very essence of survival. The P-38L model, by its published specifications, boasts a combat radius of 570 miles, Lewis elaborated. However, in practical terms, we are consistently pushing that operational envelope on every single mission. Our standard procedure mandates 2200 to 2400 RPM, coupled with auto-rich mixture settings. This results in a total fuel consumption rate exceeding 100 gallons per hour. Lindbergh nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, but MacDonald perceived something distinct in his gaze. Not confusion, but rather a profound recognition. Much like an experienced mechanic, hearing a set of symptoms he had encountered and accurately diagnosed on numerous prior occasions. "These boys return utterly exhausted," Lewis continued, his voice tinged with empathy. 7 grueling hours confined within that cockpit is nothing short of torture. They are literally sitting on a parachute, an emergency raft, and an oar. The sheer physical strain is one formidable challenge, but the mental pressure— He gestured toward the map once more, emphasizing the vast, unforgiving distances. Every mission brief invariably transforms into a complex fuel calculation. How much reserve fuel is truly available? How long can we realistically remain over the target area? What constitutes our absolute point of no return? MacDonald had witnessed this immense pressure firsthand. Young pilots, some barely 21 years old, hunched over flight planning tables, meticulously using slide rules and pencils to calculate margins that would ultimately determine whether they would live to see another sunrise. Far too many courageous men had already been tragically lost, not to enemy bullets, but to the unforgiving reality of empty fuel tanks. The mathematics of their situation were brutal and unforgiving. To run out of fuel over the vast, indifferent Pacific Ocean meant that rescue was, at best, a remote and highly improbable prospect. The situation, by all accounts, appeared exceedingly improbable, bordering on the impossible. And the operational challenges are only intensifying, Lewis remarked in a subdued tone. Our strategic objectives are progressively moving further afield, from Rabaul to Wewak, and now we are contemplating aerial assaults deep within the Philippine archipelago. The theater of war is inexorably shifting westward, yet our aircraft's fuel-carrying capacity remains stubbornly unchanged. Lindbergh, a man of remarkable composure, absorbed every word without interruption, interspersing his attentive silence with occasional, incisive queries pertaining to fuel mixture configurations, optimal propeller pitch angles, and efficient cruise altitudes. His questions were not only precise and technically sophisticated, but also unveiled an astonishing breadth of knowledge regarding complex aircraft systems, a depth that genuinely took MacDonald by surprise. This was evidently more than just a famed personality engaging in polite conversation. This was a seasoned aviator who possessed an unparalleled mastery of power plant management, a level of expertise rarely attained by even the most experienced combat pilots. Have you explored alternative cruise settings? Lindbergh finally inquired, his voice cutting through the quiet contemplation. Lewis and MacDonald exchanged a quick, knowing glance. Our technical orders are quite explicit, Lewis responded with measured caution. We scrupulously adhere to standard engine management procedures, maintaining high RPMs and utilizing rich fuel mixtures. These protocols are what keep these Allisons functioning reliably. An almost imperceptible shift occurred in Lindbergh's expression. It wasn't outright disagreement, but rather the look of someone who had encountered conventional wisdom that starkly contrasted with his own empirical observations and extensive experience. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Mr. Lindbergh, MacDonald began slowly, his voice laced with curiosity. You made reference to certain observations concerning long-range flight. Could you elaborate on the nature of these observations? For the first time since their meeting commenced, a faint smile graced Lindbergh's lips. Would you be amenable to a practical demonstration? I completed my checkout in the P-38 a few days ago, even flying Dick Bong's former aircraft to this base. I would very much like to participate in one of your combat missions. The audacious request hung heavy in the humid air between them. MacDonald felt the formidable burden of command settle upon his shoulders. Permitting a civilian, even one of Charles Lindbergh's immense stature, to join active combat operations entailed risks that extended far beyond the usual mission parameters. Yet something in the man's quiet, resolute confidence suggested that this was no mere flight of fancy or idle curiosity. What precisely did you have in mind? MacDonald pressed. Seeking further clarification, the recreation hall at Hollandia bore the unmistakable signs of extensive wear and tear. Its glory days long since faded, though MacDonald could not recall a time when it had truly flourished. Its dirt floors, compacted hard by months of relentless foot traffic, and a palm thatch roof that offered little reprieve from the persistent afternoon rains, spoke volumes of its utilitarian existence. A solitary ping-pong table served as the squadron's primary, if not sole source of entertainment during their precious downtime from flying missions or maintaining their vital aircraft. Unshaded incandescent bulbs dangled precariously from the rafters, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows that seemed to prematurely age and weary every face in the room. MacDonald positioned himself near the makeshift podium, nothing more than a wooden crate inverted, and surveyed the assembled pilots of the 475th Fighter Group. 43 young men, the vast majority under the age of 25, all exhibited the telltale 1,000-yard stare, a profound weariness born from countless perilous hours spent over hostile territories, their minds perpetually fixated on dwindling fuel gauges. Some occupied folding chairs, ostensibly requisitioned from various supply depots, while others sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, and a handful leaned against the walls, arms folded, an air of anticipation mixing with their fatigue. "Gentlemen," MacDonald commenced, his voice cutting through the subdued murmur of conversation. "Mr. Lindbergh has something of considerable importance to impart regarding the extension of our operational range capabilities." Lindbergh stepped forward with the measured self-assurance of an individual well accustomed to addressing skeptical audiences. He wore the identical Navy khakis from their meeting 2 days prior, though MacDonald now observed the subtle details that distinguished his attire from standard military issue. A civilian wristwatch, the conspicuous absence of regulation insignia, and the inherent, almost unconscious grace in his movements, indicative of a lifetime intimately involved with aviation. "Reduce your standard 2200 RPM to 1600, Lindbergh declared without any preliminary remarks or contextual preamble. It was a stark, technical directive, pregnant with the potential to either preserve lives or irrevocably damage engines. Set fuel mixtures to auto-lean instead of auto-rich. Incrementally increase manifold pressures to compensate." The ensuing silence was of a familiar kind to MacDonald. Not confusion, but the arduous mental processing of pilots attempting to reconcile this radical proposition with every fundamental principle they had ever been taught. Lieutenant Bobby Johnson, one of their most reliable formation leaders, tentatively raised his hand. "Sir, are you suggesting we can reduce RPM to 1600 and concurrently use 30 inches of mercury manifold pressure?" "That is precisely correct," Lindbergh affirmed. "The resulting fuel savings will range between 50 and 100 gallons per mission, contingent upon prevailing conditions and flight duration." The silence deepened, becoming almost oppressive. MacDonald intently observed the conflicting emotions, hope and horror, playing across his pilots' faces. Hope, because an extended range promised enhanced survival odds, greater tactical flexibility, and the ability to strike targets that had previously been beyond their reach. Horror, because every flight instructor, every technical manual, every engine school had unequivocally ingrained in them the same cardinal principle: never operate over square. Captain Jim Watkins articulated the collective apprehension, stating, "Mr. Lindbergh, that technique will inevitably burn up our engines. We have always been instructed that low RPM combined with high manifold pressure causes detonation." "You've been misinformed," Lindbergh interjected, his voice imbued with the quiet, unshakable authority of absolute certainty. "The efficacy of this technique stems from maintaining a high manifold pressure while simultaneously reducing RPM rather than operating both parameters at elevated levels. When combined with auto-lean mixture settings instead of auto-rich, this method effectively reduces total fuel consumption to approximately 70 gallons per hour." Lieutenant Thomas Hayes, a youthful aviator barely 22 years of age, still radiating the fervent intensity of someone who had graduated flight school a mere 6 months prior, performed the calculations aloud. 70 gallons per hour versus our current 100 plus. That represents almost a 30% reduction. "More than that, in fact," Lindbergh corrected him. "When flying at an indicated airspeed of 185 life-rpe, this technique yields roughly 26 miles per gallon. Consequently, your combat radius extends dramatically from 570 miles to a potential 700, or even 750 miles, depending on specific operational conditions." The staggering figures hung in the humid air, resonating like unexploded artillery shells awaiting detonation. MacDonald could clearly discern his pilots diligently performing mental arithmetic, striving to grasp the profound, practical implications of these numbers. A combat radius of 750 miles translated into missions that had previously been deemed utterly impossible. Deep penetration strikes into Japanese-held territories that had perpetually remained beyond their aircraft's maximum fuel envelope. However, the inherent resistance among the pilots ran far deeper than mere mathematical considerations. Their very survival in countless harrowing combat engagements had been predicated upon rigid adherence to established procedures specifically designed to ensure engine reliability and aircraft integrity. The Allison V-1710 engines powering their P-38s were notoriously temperamental even under conventional operating parameters. The mere notion of tampering with established cruise settings felt akin to gambling with their own lives. The seasoned aviators found themselves confronting a radical proposition that challenged their very understanding of flight, one that could potentially save their lives. Major Pete Peterson, a combat-hardened veteran whose numerous missions over the treacherous skies of Rabaul had imbued him with a healthy, earned skepticism, voiced the collective apprehension. "Sir," he began, his tone reflecting years of adherence to established protocols, "every single technical directive we have ever consulted explicitly cautions against over-square engine operation, warning of the severe risks of engine knock and subsequent piston damage." Lindbergh, however, met this deeply ingrained belief with a calm and measured response. "The procedure you perceive as controversial only seems so because you have been rigorously trained to believe it would inflict harm upon the engines," he explained with unwavering patience. "But I implore you to critically examine the origins of that very training. How many of your instructors possess genuine hands-on experience with sustained long-range cruise flight? How many had actually operated these precise power plants under conditions demanding extended endurance?" This penetrating inquiry struck at the very core of their quandary. The foundational principles of military flight instruction were predominantly centered on mastering combat maneuvers, executing precise formation flying, and achieving superior gunnery skills. It conspicuously lacked emphasis on the kind of highly efficient, long-distance cruise techniques that Lindbergh had meticulously refined over his many decades immersed in civilian aviation. The technical orders themselves, it became clear, were drafted by engineers whose paramount concern was engine longevity, often at the expense of operational range, operating under the assumption that the aircraft's fuel capacity, rather than its rate of consumption, would invariably dictate the ultimate limits of any mission. Lieutenant Colonel Smith, who had maintained a thoughtful silence throughout Lindbergh's initial exposition, finally interjected. "Mr. Lindbergh, you are proposing that we undertake missions lasting 9 hours. Already, 7 hours confined within the cockpit of a Lightning is an ordeal of considerable magnitude. One must contend with the discomfort of sitting atop emergency equipment, grapple with the unpredictable quirks of the oxygen system, and battle the insidious onset of fatigue that inevitably impairs judgment." He swept a hand towards the assembled group of pilots. 9 hours, it seems, transcends the very limits of human endurance. MacDonald, the commanding officer, offered a grim nod of assent. The formidable physical challenges were undeniably real and could not be lightly dismissed. P-38 cockpits were notoriously cramped even under the most favorable circumstances, and the prospect of extended missions meant enduring hours perched on parachutes, emergency rafts, and an array of survival gear. Oxygen masks, initially tolerable, gradually became increasingly uncomfortable, while radio headsets exerted persistent pressure points. Furthermore, the relentless mental strain of navigating over vast, featureless expanses of ocean steadily eroded the resilience of even the most experienced pilots. "The endurance challenge is indeed a legitimate concern," Lindbergh conceded, his voice steady. "However, consider the stark alternative. How many of your pilots have you already lost to the tragic reality of fuel starvation? How many critical missions have been prematurely aborted because insufficient fuel margins precluded adequate time over the designated target? The question landed with profound impact, resonating deeply, because every pilot present in that room knew the chilling answers. Far too many brave men had simply vanished over the immense expanse of the Pacific, their aircraft disappearing without a trace when fuel supplies dwindled hundreds of miles from any landmass. Others had been reluctantly compelled to turn back well short of their objectives, thereby permitting enemy installations to remain operational due to the critical lack of sufficient fuel to prosecute their attacks. The fundamental choice before us is not merely between comfort and discomfort, Lindbergh continued softly, his gaze sweeping across their faces. It is between employing empirically proven techniques that demonstrably extend your operational capability and clinging to conventional methods that may be unnecessarily curtailing your overall effectiveness. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. MacDonald meticulously observed the countenances surrounding him, discerning a complex interplay of curiosity and palpable concern etched into their expressions. These were battle-hardened veterans, individuals who had learned through countless engagements to implicitly trust their equipment and their rigorous training. Yet, they were also quintessential pragmatists, acutely aware that survival in the unforgiving theater of war frequently hinged upon their capacity to adapt to novel information and embrace innovative approaches. Mr. Lindbergh, MacDonald finally articulated, his decision made, would you be prepared to personally demonstrate this technique on an actual combat mission? The morning of July 3rd dawned with exceptional clarity over Hollandia, offering a horizon-to-horizon visibility for the first time in an entire week. At precisely 05:30, MacDonald stood vigilantly beside his P-38 Lightning, observing as the diligent ground crews meticulously completed their pre-flight inspections, while the tropical air still retained the lingering relative coolness of the receding night. Today's mission would serve as the ultimate crucible, testing every assertion Lindbergh had made regarding fuel management, a formidable 1,280-mile round trip that would push even the most conventional fuel planning strategies to their absolute, unforgiving limits. Lindbergh emerged from the operations tent, his flight gear carried with the deliberate, almost ritualistic movements of someone who had performed this exact sequence thousands of times throughout his illustrious career. His borrowed flight suit, while functional, fit him reasonably well, though MacDonald couldn't help but notice that Lindbergh wore civilian flying boots, a stark contrast to the standard military issue. More telling, however, was the inherent ease with which he handled his personal equipment, his parachute harness, the distinctive Mae West life jacket, his oxygen mask, and the compact survival kit, each item arranged with the meticulous efficiency born of extensive, lifelong practice. The weather appears auspicious for the demonstration, Lindbergh observed, casting a discerning glance toward the eastern horizon, where the nascent sun was just beginning to dissipate the lingering overnight haze. Visibility should remain unimpeded for navigational purposes, and the winds are remarkably minimal. MacDonald offered a terse nod, though his primary focus remained squarely on the intricate fuel calculations he had painstakingly rerun no less than 3 times during the preceding night. Under standard cruise settings, the mission would demand every single drop of the P-38's internal fuel capacity, leaving virtually no reserve whatsoever for unforeseen combat maneuvering or the potential encounter with unexpected headwinds. Should Lindbergh's unconventional technique fail to deliver the promised fuel savings, they would find themselves grimly calculating glide ratios over the vast, unforgiving expanse of the open ocean. "Tommy will be flying your wing today," MacDonald announced, indicating Major Thomas Maguire, who was diligently completing his own pre-flight inspection 2 aircraft down the bustling flight line. "He will be meticulously monitoring your fuel consumption." Maguire looked up at the mention of his name, offering a brief, acknowledging wave. As America's second-highest scoring ace, he had specifically volunteered for this perilous mission, driven by a desire to personally observe Lindbergh's radical methods under genuine combat conditions. If this innovative fuel management technique proved effective for someone possessing Maguire's famously aggressive flying style, it stood to reason that it would be applicable and beneficial for any pilot within the squadron. The pre-mission briefing had been commendably straightforward. Their objective was to patrol specific sectors northeast of their current position, with the potential for ground attack opportunities against Japanese supply installations situated on several small strategic islands. Nothing about the mission was extraordinary by their recent demanding standards, but the sheer distance involved would undeniably test both the aircraft's fuel efficiency and the pilot's human endurance to their absolute maximum. Lindbergh ascended into his cockpit with a practiced, almost seamless efficiency, his every movement economical and remarkably precise. MacDonald closely observed him as he meticulously ran through his pre-flight checklist, noting with particular interest that the civilian pilot dedicated extra time to the intricate configurations of the fuel system. Diverging significantly from standard military procedure, Lindbergh adjusted his mixture controls to auto-lean settings even before initiating engine start, and his propeller controls were set for a noticeably lower RPM than any P-38 pilot had ever been formally trained to employ. The engine start proceeded entirely normally, both colossal Allison V-1710s roaring to life with their characteristic powerful whine as the turbo superchargers swiftly spooled up to their optimal operating speed. However, once taxi clearance was granted, MacDonald immediately perceived a distinct difference. Lindbergh's engines ran discernibly quieter than those operating under standard settings, their exhaust note resonating deeper and significantly less aggressive. "Hollandia Tower, Lightning Flight requesting takeoff clearance," MacDonald transmitted crisply. The tower controller's voice crackled back. "Lightning Flight cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Wind calm, visibility unlimited." The 4 P-38s gracefully lifted off in a tight formation, steadily climbing through 3,000 feet as they set their course northeastward toward their designated patrol area. MacDonald maintained his throttles and mixture controls at their regulation settings, all the while maintaining unwavering visual contact with Lindbergh's aircraft, which flew steadfastly on his right wing. Even during the initial climb, he could clearly discern that Lindbergh's engines appeared to be developing identical power, despite their markedly different operational configurations. Upon reaching the designated cruising altitude, the highly anticipated demonstration truly commenced. From the radio, Lindbergh's voice resonated with remarkable technical clarity, meticulously detailing his adjustments. "I am now lowering the engine's revolutions per minute to 1600, setting the manifold pressure to 30 inches, configuring the mixture to auto-lean, and maintaining an indicated airspeed of 185 knots. Concurrently, McDonald diligently verified these parameters against his own aircraft's instrumentation, ensuring all readings were consistent. McDonald's own Lightning P-38 was consuming aviation fuel precisely as anticipated, hovering around 52 gallons per engine per hour, culminating in a total burn rate of 104 gallons hourly. Yet, through careful visual assessment, it became evident that Lindbergh's aircraft, despite operating under vastly divergent engine settings, was effortlessly sustaining the exact same airspeed and altitude. The initial 60 minutes of the flight unfolded without incident, with the navigational trajectory unfolding precisely as pre-planned. McDonald, compelled by a burgeoning curiosity, found himself scrutinizing his fuel flow gauges with an intensity greater than his norm, constantly juxtaposing his personal consumption figures against the meticulously calculated mission planning projections. All aspects of his own aircraft's performance aligned perfectly with the anticipated metrics, a reality that rendered Lindbergh's extraordinary assertion progressively more compelling. Should this civilian aviator genuinely be realizing a 30% reduction in fuel expenditure while concurrently upholding optimal cruise performance, the potential ramifications for the vast and demanding Pacific theater of operations would be nothing short of revolutionary, fundamentally altering strategic capabilities. We kindly ask you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. At the 90-minute juncture of the flight, the quiet hum of the radio was punctuated by McGuire's voice, breaking the prevailing silence. "Lead. My instruments are indicating a fuel flow that is approximately 20% lower than what is typically expected for this stage of our journey." This unexpected transmission served to unequivocally validate a suspicion that had already begun to form in McDonald's mind. Remarkably, even McGuire, who was ostensibly adhering to conventional cruise power configurations, was, through his close observation of Lindbergh's innovative technique, unconsciously integrating more economical power management strategies into his own flying. The profound psychological impact of witnessing such effective fuel conservation firsthand was demonstrably shaping and subtly altering the flying habits of the entire formation, leading to an unexpected ripple effect of efficiency. Precisely 2 hours into their operational sortie, the flight encountered its inaugural tactical challenge. Earlier intelligence dispatches had flagged potential Japanese barge movements in the vicinity of Samate Island, and indeed, subsequent visual reconnaissance confirmed the presence of multiple enemy targets securely moored within a sheltered inlet. Conventional attack protocols mandated rapid, high-speed passes executed at maximum power output, precisely the sort of fuel-guzzling maneuvers that inherently complicated and constrained the viability of extended-range missions. McDonald's voice cut through the airwaves with decisive command. "Lightning Flight, this is Lead. We have a target area directly ahead. Prepare yourselves for a ground attack engagement." McDonald decisively advanced his throttles, experiencing the immediate surge of power as both engines roared to life, their fuel consumption simultaneously escalating to peak combat settings. The subsequent attack sequence unfolded with textbook precision, encompassing steep diving approaches, repeated strafing runs against the targets, and agile defensive maneuvers designed to evade the incoming anti-aircraft fire. However, a striking detail caught his attention. Lindbergh, remarkably, sustained his position within the formation throughout the entire engagement, his aircraft exhibiting perfectly normal responsiveness to the rigorous demands of combat power, notwithstanding its previously unconventional and fuel-efficient cruise configuration. The intense engagement extended for a total of 12 minutes, during which all 4 aircraft expended a substantial quantity of ammunition against the Japanese barges and their accompanying shore installations. As they ascended back to their cruising altitude, MacDonald meticulously reconfigured his engines to the standard long-range settings, simultaneously keeping a vigilant eye on his remaining fuel reserves. The combat power phase had consumed fuel at precisely the anticipated rates, leaving him with approximately 60% of his total capacity for the journey back to base. Initiating a routine fuel status check, MacDonald transmitted, "Lead, fuel check." McGuire's prompt response followed, 2 showing 60% remaining. Then from the 3rd aircraft came the report, 3, 58%. Lindbergh's calm voice concluded the sequence, 4, 72% remaining. MacDonald, utterly convinced he had misapprehended the communication, instinctively double-checked his radio settings. 72%, he questioned aloud, his mind grappling with the reported figure. After 2 full hours of sustained cruise flight and an additional 12 minutes of rigorous combat maneuvering, Lindbergh's aircraft still possessed nearly 3/4 of its original fuel load. These figures, by every metric MacDonald comprehended regarding the P-38's typical fuel consumption, were simply beyond the realm of possibility. He immediately requested clarification. 4. Please repeat your fuel remaining. Lindbergh's unwavering voice confirmed, 72% confirmed. My fuel flow during the cruise segments has consistently averaged approximately 70 gallons per hour total. The mathematical implications were now indisputable and starkly evident. Whereas MacDonald's own aircraft had expended an estimated 200 gallons of fuel during the initial leg of their mission, Lindbergh had utilized a mere 140 gallons, covering the identical distance over the same duration of flight. This remarkable 30% reduction in consumption precisely mirrored the promise Lindbergh had articulated during their pre-mission briefing. But witnessing its tangible demonstration, even under the duress of actual combat scenarios, elevated a mere theoretical possibility into a profound operational reality. The subsequent return leg of their journey offered further, compelling corroboration of Lindbergh's extraordinary efficiency. Even while meticulously adhering to the formation's collective airspeed and altitude, Lindbergh's aircraft consistently exhibited a significantly reduced fuel consumption rate compared to the standard settings. As the shores of Hollandia gradually appeared on the horizon, MacDonald found himself mentally calculating fuel margins that felt almost lavishly generous, a stark contrast to the typically stringent and often precarious planning they usually undertook. The landing itself served to fully unveil the profound success of the demonstration. Without delay, the meticulous ground crews initiated precise fuel measurements, employing calibrated dipsticks to ascertain the exact consumption for each individual aircraft. MacDonald's Lightning had returned with 18% of its fuel capacity still intact, a quantity deemed sufficient for mission completion, but affording only a slender reserve for any unforeseen contingencies. In striking contrast, Lindbergh emerged from his cockpit with an astonishing 34% of his fuel still residing within his tanks, a testament to his groundbreaking technique. The initial fissures in the wall of skepticism began to manifest among the seasoned ground crews. Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski, a veteran who had meticulously serviced P-38 engines since before the attack on Pearl Harbor, possessed an innate understanding of fuel consumption, akin to a banker's comprehension of compound interest, through unwavering, daily, and precise observation of incontrovertible data. When Lindbergh's Lightning consistently returned from operational sorties, exhibiting fuel readings that fundamentally contradicted every technical manual Kowalski had ever pored over, this experienced mechanic started posing probing questions that effortlessly bypassed conventional military hierarchical structures. "Colonel MacDonald, sir," Kowalski stated with conviction after the 5th successive mission, where Lindbergh's fuel consumption remained a remarkable 30% below established standard rates. "It seems this civilian is either equipped with engines of magical provenance, or every principle we've been instructed on regarding cruise settings is fundamentally erroneous." MacDonald, increasingly swayed by the accumulating facts, found himself nodding in agreement with growing frequency during these candid discussions. The empirical evidence was now accumulating with an irrefutable mathematical precision that rendered it impossible to either disregard or rationalize away. Mission after mission, Lindbergh's aircraft returned with fuel quantities that, considering the distances covered and the time aloft, should have been utterly unattainable. Crucially, his engines displayed no discernible indications of the wear or damage that prevailing military doctrine adamantly asserted would inevitably result from over-square operational techniques. Conversely, the resistance emanating from the pilots themselves proved considerably more entrenched and less susceptible to persuasion than the purely mechanical evidence. Lieutenant Hayes, who had bravely volunteered to experiment with Lindbergh's innovative technique during a dedicated training flight, returned from his inaugural attempt visibly discomposed, clearly affected by the profound psychological burden of operating engines in configurations that stood in direct opposition to every principle he had ever been formally instructed upon. "It felt fundamentally incorrect the entire duration, sir," he confessed to MacDonald, conveying a sensation akin to constantly anticipating an imminent catastrophic failure or explosion. Despite his significant discomfort, Hayes also reported fuel consumption figures that aligned with Lindbergh's assertions with remarkable accuracy, a total of 73 gallons per hour, a dramatic reduction when contrasted with his customary burn rate exceeding 100 gallons hourly. Ultimately, the lieutenant's aircraft fuel gauges remained entirely indifferent to his internal psychological unease. They merely served to objectively register the irrefutable mathematical reality of the demonstrably enhanced operational efficiency. A significant leap forward in operational performance was achieved. Major Peterson, a seasoned aviator with extensive experience from perilous sorties over heavily defended Japanese strongholds, epitomized the staunch resistance of the old guard against the introduction of a novel technique. His survival, he maintained, stemmed from scrupulous adherence to established procedures that ensured his aircraft remained operational even when other pilots exceeded prudent limits. During one particularly intense debate within the operations tent, He confronted Mr. Lindbergh, stating, "Mr. Lindbergh, you are asking us to jeopardize our existence by adopting methodologies that contravene every principle we understand about engine management." Lindbergh's rejoinder, delivered with the composed demeanor of an individual accustomed to engineering apprehension, clarified, "Major, your understanding of engine management originates from training specifically tailored for distinct operational requirements, brief flight durations, maximum power settings, and prudent safety buffers appropriate for instructional environments." He then gestured towards the mission planning board, which was covered with flight paths stretching hundreds of miles across an expansive, empty ocean, emphasizing, "These particular missions necessitate efficiency strategies that were not encompassed within the conventional armed forces syllabus." Tidee! The pivotal moment materialized during a crucial mission to Wewak on July 28th. Colonel MacDonald had initially devised the strike as a conventional squadron assault against Japanese logistical hubs. However, updated intelligence reports indicated the presence of formidable enemy interceptor forces, foreshadowing the kind of protracted air-to-air engagements that would scrutinize every facet of aircraft performance under the uttermost challenging circumstances imaginable. Lindbergh, on that momentous day, flew on Maguire's wing, strategically positioning himself to allow the squadron's most experienced combat aviator to meticulously observe his innovative techniques during actual aerial combat. The operational blueprint stipulated a 400-mile transit to the target vicinity, followed by prospective aerial confrontation, ground assault, and the subsequent return flight. A precisely complex operation where judicious fuel management could unequivocally signify the distinction between mission triumph and catastrophic failure. As intelligence had accurately predicted, they encountered Japanese aircraft, a formation of Mitsubishi Ki-51 dive bombers, robustly escorted by Agile Zero fighters, approaching Wewak from the northwest. The engagement commenced with standard tactical maneuvers, including establishing an altitude advantage, executing coordinated attacks, and employing aggressive maneuvering to secure advantageous firing positions. Yet, as the dogfight prolonged beyond its normal duration, the rate of fuel depletion rapidly escalated into a decisive element for every pilot involved in the fray. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. MacDonald observed the aerial combat unfold with the impartial exactitude of a commander who had witnessed countless similar engagements. P-38s engaged Japanese fighters in complex aerial ballets, three-dimensional chess matches, where instantaneous judgments determined survival. Ammunition expenditure, fuel burn rates, and tactical positioning were all integrated into the rapid assessments that pilots made intuitively while enduring extreme gravitational forces during combat turns. The leader of the Japanese formation, subsequently identified as Captain Saburo Shimatada, showcased the audacious aerial maneuvers that had cemented the legendary status of Zero pilots during the initial years of the conflict. Shimada's aircraft pierced through defensive maneuvers with a precision that suggested myriad hours of operational flight experience, compelling American pilots to respond with peak engine outputs that consumed fuel at rates significantly exceeding standard operational parameters. Maguire's transmission fragmented through the radio during a fleeting respite in the engagement, his voice urgent. Multiple adversaries, ordnance dwindling, propellant supply turning critical. It was precisely the kind of dire scenario that differentiated veteran aviators from those who had not yet mastered the art of juggling myriad concurrent emergencies. Ammunition reserves, fuel levels, the capabilities of enemy aircraft, the distance to home base, and prevailing weather conditions all necessitated prompt appraisal, while simultaneously preserving tactical cognizance in the dynamic, three-dimensional combat environment. Lindbergh's aircraft navigated through the engagement with the same meticulous command he consistently demonstrated during efficient cruise flight. Characterized by economical movements, the avoidance of superfluous thrust adjustments, and an unwavering strategic placement that unequivocally suggested his absolute mastery of the P-38's handling characteristics. When Shimada's damaged aircraft turned directly towards Lindbergh in what appeared to be a suicidal collision attempt, the civilian pilot's response was swift and resolute. The short confrontation concluded with Shimada's aircraft plunging uncontrollably towards the depths of the ocean, emitting vapor and detritus. Lindbergh had achieved his inaugural and solitary triumph in the air during the war, but the import transcended mere individual combat success. He had unequivocally proven that fuel-efficient cruise techniques did not impair operational prowess when applied by pilots who possessed a comprehensive understanding of both sophisticated engine management and astute tactical flying. The return flight offered ultimate corroboration of the technique's real-world operational efficacy. McDonald's formation had been aloft for more than 8 hours, a duration that included protracted dogfighting at peak thrust configurations. Conventional fuel projections would have left most pilots calculating contingency touchdown alternatives or contemplating ditching procedures if adverse winds intensified. Instead, they landed at Hollandia with surprisingly ample fuel margins that seemed almost luxurious. McDonald touched down with sufficient propellant for an additional 60 minutes of flight. McGuire, who had been trialing adjusted flight parameters throughout the mission, reported comparable reserves. But Lindbergh's fuel gauges displayed volumes that defied belief. Enough remaining fuel for nearly 2 supplementary hours of flight time. The ground crew's after-mission examinations revealed no engine damage, no absence of anomalous abrasion patterns, and no engineering malfunctions that would suggest detrimental consequences from oversquare engine utilization. Kowalski's meticulous scrutiny of Lindbergh's engines actually showed marginally reduced abrasion compared to comparable aircraft operated under standard settings, strongly implying that efficient cruise techniques might actually prolong the operational longevity of the power plants instead of diminishing it. News of the aerial triumph propagated swiftly throughout the 475th Fighter Group, with the alacrity characteristic of vital military intelligence. Lindbergh had not only exhibited propellant economy under the uttermost challenging combat scenarios, but had also validated operational prowess against skilled adversaries, returning with engine conditions that refuted all admonitions regarding oversquare damage. Major Peterson approached McDonald that evening with the reluctant admiration of someone whose vocational reservations had been surmounted by irrefutable proof. "Colonel," he stated, "I'd like to request permission to try Mr. Lindbergh's techniques on tomorrow's patrol mission." The barrier of resistance had irrevocably collapsed. Within a mere week, every pilot in the squadron was trialing diminished engine revolutions and automated lean fuel configurations. The results corresponded with Lindbergh's forecasts with precise numerical fidelity. a 30% reduction in fuel consumption, enhanced operational reach, and an absence of engineering malfunctions unforeseen by antiquated instructional dogma. MacDonald realized they had witnessed more than a mere technical demonstration. They had seen established organizational wisdom confronted and superseded by evidence that could neither be dismissed nor ignored. By August 1944, the metamorphosis reached its culmination. What had commenced as one civilian's contentious proposition had swiftly evolved into established operational protocol across every P-38 unit in the Pacific Theater. Flight manuals were expeditiously amended, engineering directives redrafted, and training aviators found themselves instructing methodologies that fundamentally opposed all their acquired knowledge from their own formative instruction. This organizational paradigm shift transpired with astonishing swiftness, propelled by outcomes that leadership found impossible to disregard. MacDonald stood within the operational command tent, intently scrutinizing strategic operational charts that would have been utterly inconceivable merely a few months prior. These meticulously plotted routes stretched profoundly into Japanese-held territory, detailing expansive 950-mile round trips to distant Balikpapan, prolonged surveillance patrols over the vast Celebes Sea, and critical escort missions that pushed the P-38's inherent capabilities to extremes that former military doctrine had dismissed as pure fantasy. The statistics unveiled the narrative with irrefutable mathematical precision. The combat radius, a critical metric, had dramatically extended from 570 miles to an impressive 750 miles. Concurrently, fuel consumption saw a significant reduction of 30%, while overall mission capability expanded by a remarkable 40% in terms of sustained flight time. Colonel Lewis approached, bearing the latest operational reports, his expression one of profound contentment, characteristic of an officer whose complex tactical problems had been elegantly resolved by an unexpected and brilliant innovation. The 432nd Squadron successfully completed an 8-hour escort mission to Borneo yesterday. He reported with a hint of satisfaction. The formation remained intact, there were no fuel emergencies whatsoever, and adequate reserves were maintained for necessary combat maneuvering over the target area. The profound significance of this achievement was certainly not lost on MacDonald. Such 8-hour missions had been mere theoretical discussions, subjects of speculative conjecture, just 4 months earlier. Now they represented routine operations that pilots undertook with unwavering confidence, rather than with desperate hope. The psychological transformation among the air crews mirrored the technical advancements with striking congruence. Pilots and support personnel no longer calculated fuel margins with the somber exactitude of individuals anticipating their demise from empty tanks over an endless, unforgiving ocean. Technical Sergeant Kowalski, a man who had become an unforeseen authority on these novel procedures, tirelessly trained ground crews across the vast Pacific Theater on the intricate nuances of mixture settings and power management, all designed to maximize fuel efficiency. His meticulously compiled maintenance reports consistently indicated engine conditions that matched or even surpassed standard operational parameters, thereby conclusively refuting long-standing admonitions spanning decades about the purported dangers of over-square damage. Engines operated under Mr. Lindbergh's specific settings are actually exhibiting less wear than comparable aircraft run at standard cruise power, Kowalski declared during one of their regular maintenance briefings. Lower combustion temperatures, a noticeable reduction in mechanical stress, and improved fuel atomization are collectively extending service life rather than shortening it. This mechanical corroboration represented more than mere technical validation. It profoundly suggested that institutional knowledge, meticulously codified in training manuals and perpetuated through generations of military instruction, could be fundamentally erroneous regarding basic operational principles. The implications of this revelation reached far beyond simple fuel consumption, extending into fundamental questions about how military organizations evaluated, adopted, and integrated new information. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Lieutenant Hayes, who had emerged as one of the squadron's foremost proponents for these innovative techniques, had personally logged well over 200 hours utilizing Lindbergh's methods. His meticulously kept logbook detailed fuel savings that amassed into tangible operational benefits, directly measurable in terms of enhanced combat effectiveness. "Sir," he conveyed to MacDonald during a mission debriefing, "yesterday's extensive patrol to Halmahera would have been absolutely impossible under the old cruise settings. We successfully flew for 9 hours, engaged enemy aircraft over the target, and still landed with sufficient fuel remaining for another hour of flight." The human factor had demonstrated comparable flexibility and adaptability to the technical systems themselves. Pilots, who were initially apprehensive about the prospect of 9-hour endurance missions, soon discovered that the reduced engine noise and vibration resulting from lower RPM settings actually decreased fatigue during these extended flights. Cockpit comfort markedly improved, the demands on the oxygen system remained entirely manageable, and the relentless psychological pressure of precise fuel calculations receded to acceptable thresholds. Major McGuire had become the technique's most effective advocate among the combat pilots. His formidable reputation commanded significant authority throughout the fighter community, and his unequivocal endorsement of Lindbergh's methods profoundly influenced pilots across multiple squadrons. The antiquated way of thinking about fuel management was, in essence, killing us, McGuire observed during an informal gathering of squadron leaders. Not through direct mechanical failure, but through self-imposed limitations that tragically prevented us from reaching targets that, by all rights, should have been well within our operational capability. The far-reaching strategic ramifications crystallized as mission planners fully grasped that P-38 units could now effectively strike targets hitherto designated exclusively for heavy bombardment aircraft. Japanese installations that had previously enjoyed immunity due to their remoteness from fighter bases were suddenly accessible to formations capable of flying nearly 10 hours with ample fuel reserves for sustained combat operations. Consequently, the operational equilibrium in the Pacific theater underwent a profound alteration as American fighters gained an operational range that precisely matched the vast oceanic distances inherent in Pacific warfare. Word of this groundbreaking fuel efficiency breakthrough disseminated rapidly through informal conduits that interconnected P-38 pilots across the entire Pacific theater. Squadron commanders, from the sun-drenched coasts of Australia to the frigid Aleutian Islands, began urgently requesting detailed briefings on these revolutionary cruise techniques that promised to significantly extend their operational capabilities. This informal network of communication, deeply ingrained among fighter pilots, transmitted vital technical information far more swiftly than official military channels. MacDonald found himself responding to inquiries from units as far away as the demanding China-Burma-India theater, where P-38 pilots confronted similar range limitations over equally challenging and treacherous terrain. The techniques that Lindbergh had so effectively demonstrated over the expansive Pacific waters proved equally potent over the towering Himalayan peaks and through the dense Burmese jungles, unequivocally confirming that these fuel efficiency principles transcended specific operational environments. By late 1944, training squadrons located within the continental United States had fully integrated the novel operational protocols into their standard instruction curricula. Newly graduated pilots arrived in Pacific combat units already proficient in techniques that their predecessors had painstakingly acquired through dangerous trial and error over hostile territory. The organizational assimilation trajectory had been significantly accelerated, compressed from months of arduous combat experience into mere weeks of systematic, structured training. The statistical evidence became irrefutable as mission debriefs amassed. Pilot survival rates improved perceptibly as incidents stemming from fuel depletion receded dramatically. Mission success rates soared as formations could now remain over target areas for extended periods, providing enhanced support and destructive power. Enemy installations previously safeguarded by their sheer distance became vulnerable to regular attack by fighter aircraft capable of reaching them with more than adequate fuel reserves. Lindbergh's departure from Hollandia in August 1944 marked the conclusion of his direct involvement with Pacific operations. Yet his profound technical contribution persisted in shaping operational efficacy throughout the remaining war years. He cultivated a dedicated corps of aviators and ground support personnel who had assimilated critical fuel management principles that would subsequently form the bedrock of knowledge for the advanced development of jet-propelled aircraft in the subsequent post-war epoch. The instructional impact of this achievement transcended the immediate domain of aeronautics, extending into more expansive considerations concerning military strategic frameworks and the impetus for innovation. The remarkable breakthrough in the P-38's fuel efficiency unequivocally demonstrated that long-held conventional wisdom, even when rigorously reinforced by extensive training regimens and comprehensive technical documentation, could harbor fundamental inaccuracies regarding fundamental operational tenets. The astonishing rapidity with which novel techniques supplanted ingrained operational procedures underscored the inherent capacity of military organizations to adapt swiftly and effectively when confronted with irrefutable empirical evidence. MacDonald's conclusive mission report, dispatched to the higher echelons of command, meticulously quantified this transformative shift in metrics directly pertinent to strategic planners. The report elucidated a significant extension of combat radius by precisely 31%. Simultaneously, it detailed a substantial reduction in fuel consumption, registering at 30%. Furthermore, the operational capability for mission duration witnessed a notable increase of 40%. These tangible numerical improvements translated directly into formidable tactical advantages, profoundly influencing the intricate processes of air campaign planning across the vast expanse of the Pacific theater. Moreover, these achievements established enduring precedents for long-range fighter operations, a legacy that would persist and evolve through the crucible of the Korean War and far beyond. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. This quiet yet profound revolution, which originated from a solitary civilian's unconventional suggestion to experiment with alternative engine configurations, fundamentally reconfigured the operational parameters of America's most strategically vital fighter aircraft within the largest theater of global conflict. The underlying lesson, while deceptively simple, carried immense profundity. Occasionally, even established experts may harbor erroneous assumptions, and indeed optimizing fuel economy can be directly synonymous with securing decisive battlefield victories.